So what do they mean when they say that we live in an information universe? And how can you use that to actually make a difference and improve your life? Before we get to that improving your life part, we first have to understand the information universe itself and the concepts that relate to it. And before that, we have to agree on one assumption. And the one assumption, or the major assumption that's involved with this information universe idea, is the idea of consciousness, right? One underlying substrate that is the foundation of all things, some sort of mono consciousness, right? You can call that the Great Spirit, the Most High, God, Allah, whatever the name for it is. There's something that underlines all things, right? That's the one assumption we need to make. So now to explain the information universe, my favorite place to start with a lot of things is the idea of the trinity, right? So imagine if we have the universe that is infinite and has a bunch of things in it, right? The universe. Now, within that universe, if we wanted to start to focus our attention on something, we have to create a constraint. We have to section out that infinite and say, this is what we're going to give our attention to. And immediately, once we do that, we have three components that are suddenly present. We have the constraint, we have the universe, and we also have the witness. We have the things that are outside of the constraint, right? And now with these three properties, that forms the trinity. And the trinity creates some new properties that come from that as well, which is information. And that's where the information idea comes from, right? Because the information tells us three major things. One of those is relationship. Another is organization. And the last thing it tells us is truth. So what do these three aspects of information begin to describe, right? What are the components of them? Well, if you look at the relationship component, that's where duality starts to emerge, right? Because you have masculine energy here and you have feminine energy here. And the way to tell those apart is the feminine is the witness. This is the part that is just witnessing the constraint that's being applied. It's the contemplative aspect of our being. The masculine is the part where the constraint is applied. Because masculine energy loves to organize, to label, to divide out. So that constraint that we created is the masculine saying this or that. This is what I'm going to observe and look at. That's the masculine energy. And that is everything else. Feminine energy is that. The witness is that, right? So the relationship is the this or that thinking, the duality thinking. The next component that emerges is organization, which leads us to form, right? Form can take an energetic approach or it can take a material approach. And the form is telling us in that constraint, how did we actually organize the things that define that constraint? It could be race, right? Race is a constraint that tells us based off of skin color, this is how you organize. It could be also off of species, or we have the constraint of what a planet is, right? Everything that we label and categorize, this camera I'm filming on, the constraints are it has to have a mechanism to capture visual information, for example, right? These are constraints that we apply to define things, and that constraint is an organized thing of form, right? And then the last thing that comes from there is truth. And this is where the debate comes in that like there is no real truth or there is real truth. It's because both are true. Pre-Trinity state, before the universe is divided into the witness and observer, there's no truth. That's where the I am comes from, because the universe just is, right? It just exists. I am. But once you divide it out, once you start to organize it, that's when truth starts to emerge. It is true that my sweater is purple because we've organized the vibrations in a certain range to be defined as the color purple. And that's what makes this truth exist, is because of the organization that we've created, the relationship we've said that this has with other things. Before we do those divisions, truth doesn't exist. It's just presence, right? So that's the information universe. This is like the macro understanding of how this stuff works in a big idea level. But if we wanted to actually apply that to your life and get a little bit more granular with it, what is the micro understanding of this? How do you relate to the information universe? And the one way that you relate to the information universe is through your awareness. Your awareness is your participation in this exchange of information. And your awareness is dependent on two things: your ability to perceive information and it's also dependent on your ability to detect constraints. Everything has some level of awareness, right? Everything has consciousness, and it also has some level of awareness. And it's also limited by the constraints that's been defined for that thing. Human beings, as a constraint, we have awareness of sound, but that's also constrained to like 20,000 kilohertz or something in that range. Anything above, we can't detect. We have no awareness of it because we're constrained within a certain range. Everything outside of that range doesn't exist to us. So a rock has some level of awareness because it's able to organize the minerals inside of itself to exist, but it probably can't detect how to use its computer or other things because its awareness hasn't expanded to that point yet. So now, if we want to evolve in our lives, or if you want to evolve in your life, how do you do that? Well, it's two things. It goes back to duality, right? There's a feminine part of it. My handwriting is terrible for this video. And there's a masculine part of it as well. The feminine aspect is the one that works off of desire. It desires some sort of form. It wants to witness something, right? Maybe you want to witness the experience of being rich, or the experience of having a six-pack, or a happy relationship. Whatever it is, it starts with that feminine aspect of wanting to witness something. And then you have to actually apply it. You actually have to take the masculine energy that wants to create the constraints that are going to manifest that form. So you have to be able to apply constraints. If you want to be rich, for example, there's some constraints you have to have on the amount of work that you put into something, the amount of time that you spend on certain activities. If you want to be fit, there's some constraints you're going to have on your eating habits and on your movement habits and things like that, right? So a lot of the masculine aspect is what creates the form that you desire. It's the constraints, the limitations. A lot of this world right now that we talk about in the West, people don't want constraints. They want freedoms, and they're trying to use freedoms in order to manifest things. Everybody can be everything. We can do whatever we want and all this kind of stuff. That's great. It leads to a level of comfort and fairness, but it doesn't actually create anything because there are no constraints. There's no discipline. There's no forcing masculine aspect that says, here's the work that needs to be done to manifest the things that we're looking for, whether that's a happy world, a healthy world, less violence, whatever the case is. Those require some level of constraints. You can create those constraints at a macro level, and that's what the government tries to do and establishes rule and law and enforcement and things like that in order to reduce violence. Or you can apply internal constraints. The change starts with you. That's an internal constraint saying, I will not do certain things because we have some sort of collective significance, right? So anyways, we live in an information universe, right? And to summarize that, that's based off of the trinity. And that trinity creates properties of information. Those properties are relationships, organization, and truth. Once you have those properties, your ability to participate in that information universe, to jump in the flow of consciousness and create for your own life, is your ability to see the patterns and the cycles of that information. Your ability to create things because you know what are the patterns that exist for that form you're looking for. So if you want to manifest anything in your life, you got to know what you want. You got to be able to see the pattern of how it's created by looking at other people who already have it. And then you have to apply the constraints in order to get it.